welcome to 3D. We also want to welcome our friends join us online. Great to have you guys with us as well. And we're wrapping up a series we've been in now. This is our fourth week called Our Opportunity. And I won't give you a lot of backstory to that. Just suffice it to say we've had a series theme verse. We find it in Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus, written a couple thousand years ago, but I think it has incredible relevance today. And it's found in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. Where he said, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. And then he says this, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. We've been saying this every week. These are days filled with opportunity. Now listen to what I'm going to say. Not in spite of, but because of all the craziness in our world. How many would agree there's some crazy stuff going on in our world? And when we launched this series just 4 weeks ago, it was right on the heels of some things that had transpired that was sort of like same song, second, third verse in Minneapolis, and then Baton Rouge, and then Dallas, and all of that. And throughout this series, we've addressed what maybe some would consider some of the untouchables, and we've dealt with racism and prejudice and profiling and those type of things, and where do we draw those lines? In just a few months, we're going to be presented with another incredible opportunity. You're saying, well, what's that? Well, it happens about every 4 years here in the U.S. In other words, we get to choose our next president. Can I just ask how many of you are feeling, or maybe I should ask it, how are you feeling about the political season that we're in? Let's just do a quick survey, okay? A quick survey. And I'm going to actually sit down because I want this to be a little more conversational in light of the tone and the subject matter. So how many of you are enjoying this political season? Raise your hands. Yeah, about 2 quiet takers. They raise their hand about this far. How many of you can't wait until it's over? Yeah, the majority of you in this room. How many of you get a knot in your stomach every time the subject comes up? Knot in the stomach, quite a few of you. How many of you are the ones that bring the subject up? You're not going to raise your hand because you're afraid you're going to get bombasted. How many of you watch both national conventions? How many of you just watch one because you've already chosen your candidate? So let me ask this. How many of you already know who you're going to vote for? Okay, a number of you. How many of you know who you're not going to vote for? Oh, more of you. I figured. How many of you don't think that pastors and churches should enter the fray of politics? So some of you are saying, well, but some of you are thinking, it's about time our pastor deals with this. Yeah, some of you. So we're all over the map, aren't we? And here's what I want to say. We're going to dive into it. We're going to have a conversation today about it. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But can I just invite you to do this? Reserve any judgment until the very end. So if you can, by the grace of God, set aside your predisposed thoughts about the whole process and whether or not the church should enter into the conversation. You know, because we might think that the political season that we're in is pretty hostile and brand new. And it's nothing new. It's nothing new. In fact, if you'll go back and research U.S. history, here's some interesting data points. You'll discover that in 1924, in the 1924 Democratic National Convention, it took 103 ballots before that party reached a consensus on a candidate. Can you imagine voting 103 times? How many are glad you weren't here then? Can you also imagine how MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News would have had a lot of fun with that season? See, a divisive political environment is not a new problem at all. In fact, you could argue that the political climate was even more divided and hostile in Jesus' day when he literally walked on this planet. And let me back up and provide a little context that I believe will help us out. But let me preface it with this, because some of you right now, you're really living in the tension of, I can't really believe that we're talking about this today. And, and can I just really be vulnerable and honest with you? Do you think I want to talk about it? No. I mean, we have a number of guests here today, and we celebrate you being with us. And I'm thinking, what could be worse than talking about politics? Money, maybe. And here you are. And here I am. And so in fact, if you want to talk, why don't you come up here and finish the message out? Probably no takers on that either. So here's the deal. If we don't see the link between faith and politics, listen, we will forever struggle to understand the teachings of Jesus. Let me say that again. If we don't see the link between faith and politics, we will forever struggle to really understand the teachings of Jesus. Jesus lived in the land of Israel during the time of the Roman Empire. The Jewish people obviously had suffered significantly at the hands of their oppressors, and there were a lot of different views on how they should navigate the political situation of their day. And so really at that point there were not just 2 but 4 different, if you will, political groups. Now let me tell you what they are real quick, and if you want to follow along, by the way, you can just go to YouVersion on your smartphone or your whatever device and click on 3D Church. It'll bring up the message notes for today. When you came in, you probably received a worship guide. There were some message notes in there as well. So you can just follow along. But first you had this group known as the Herodians. Now, the Herodians pretty much accepted the situation with Rome for what it was and tried to make the best of it. So they were sort of like, you could say their slogan was, if you can't beat them, join them. Herodians. On the opposite end of the political spectrum, you have the Zealots. They had great zeal for God, obviously, and beyond that, they wanted, what they really wanted was a holy war against the Romans. And they were ready for violence. The political slogan was more likely, if you have your kids, cover their ears, but give them hell. And then you had the Essenes, and they just wanted to get away from all the political tension. Some of you just said that's probably the group I would be in. And they would literally retreat to the wilderness where they could isolate themselves from the world around them, and their slogan was, just get away from them. And then fourth and finally, you had the Pharisees. They were the majority party, if you will, certainly of a religious overtone, but they thought, you know what, if we can just be good enough, if we can just live right, if we can just obey all of God's laws, then God will intervene and overthrow our Roman oppressors. Their slogan, God will get them. So you have the 4 groups. But even in Jesus' day, they were all opposing political views of where they were coming from and what they were contending for. One thing you can be sure of, these groups, are you ready for this? Didn't like each other at all. And that's why it was so unusual to see 2 of these groups actually come together in an alliance to challenge Jesus. So our primary text for today is found in Matthew's account of the gospel, chapter 10, and we pick it up, or chapter 22, and we pick it up in verse 15. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him, are you ready for this? Along with the Herodians. So remember, the Pharisees and the Herodians despised each other. They couldn't stand each other. This is the God will get them group joining ranks with the if you can't beat them, join them group. And now they've formed this alliance in order to go after Jesus. So they try to trap him with a somewhat politically charged question. Look at the next verse. Teacher, we know you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, how many know that's a setup? Flattery setup. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? I mean, taxes is a political issue. It's a politically charged question. So the tax they're talking about is what was known as literally a head tax. And it wasn't a large amount. They estimates are that it was probably about a day's wages for someone at the bottom of the pay grade of that day, one of the lower class of workers, and only a day's wages, and they only had to pay it once a year. So it wasn't a large amount, but it was an annual tax that you had to pay for the privilege of being a subject of Caesar. In other words, if you had a head, you owed the tax. Head tax. That's why it's a tricky question. If Jesus says, no, don't pay the tax, then the movement he's leading would be considered a revolt against Rome. And if that starts to circulate, how many know the Herodians, if you can't beat them, join them group, will have Jesus exactly where they want him. They've set the trap, and he's caught. As allies of Rome, they'll mobilize Roman authorities, and they literally will take Jesus out. On the other hand, if Jesus says, yes, pay the tax, then the Pharisees, the God-will-get-'em group, will accuse Jesus of being a fraud. Hey, your loyalty is to Caesar, not to God. And he'd lose the support of the majority party. Either way, the goal of the Pharisees and the Herodians is to take Jesus down, and the trap has been set. So how does Jesus respond? Verse 18. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent. How many of you would like to be Jesus sometimes? Because you can always know people's intent. Little benefit there. What'd he say? You hypocrites, you are trying to trap me. Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius. And he asked them, whose portrait is this? And whose inscription? Caesar, they replied. Then he said to them, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. Jesus is brilliant. Can we agree on that? And he leaves his adversaries amazed. They're really not sure what to do. Both groups are stunned, and so they have no reply. They literally just walk away. Now, what was so amazing about Jesus' reply? What was it that was so amazing? Well, there are three ways that Jesus handles the political scene that are really amazing and radically different from much of what we see in our world today. And I've identified these three things that Jesus uses. And just so you know, I've talked to a lot of people this week in preparation for this weekend. I said, coach me. Where are the landmines? I don't want to step on them. Where do we go with this deal? And what would you say if you were in my shoes? And got a lot of good input and contacted another pastor and said, hey, heard you say something. He goes, yeah, but I got that from another pastor. So he said, use whatever you want. So here it is. The three things that Jesus refuses. Number one, Jesus refuses political simplicity. Political simplicity. The Pharisees and the Herodians ask what? For a simple yes or no answer. Should we pay taxes or not? How many would agree that's just sort of like yes or no? But Jesus doesn't give them a simple answer, does he? He refuses to be trapped by aligning himself with one side or the other. In effect, what they're asking is, here's what they're really asking. Jesus, which party are you with? And Jesus refused to be labeled. This has a practical application for us. We must not do to Jesus what he wouldn't do to himself. Tim Keller, a pastor from New York, explains it this way. You must not say this is Jesus' party or this is Jesus' platform. He wouldn't do that. When you do that, you're mixing up God and Caesar. It's one of the things he says not to do. So I could do that right now. I could say, you have to know that Jesus is a Republican, right? I mean, everything he said was to the right. He even sat at the right hand of the Father. And some of you saying, Key, you don't get it, do you? We know Jesus was a Democrat. How do we know that? Well, talk about health care. He just ministered to anybody that came to him, and it was free for everybody. And the first, social welfare program of feeding people was like the 5,000 that was really 15 or 20,000. He just fed them, and it was free for all of them. So we could easily try to dissect things and put Jesus in a particular party or platform, but he wouldn't allow himself to be put there, and we can't do to him what he wouldn't do to himself. See, If we find ourselves believing Jesus is for one party or platform or candidate, we need to pause and consider whether we're giving Jesus a label he refused to give himself. And here's one of the best ways to make sure you're refusing political simplicity. Here's another point, sort of a sub-thought under this one in your message notes, and that's decide to be a learner, not a critic. Decide to be a learner, not a critic. When you struggle to understand someone else's point of view, ask questions, but listen. Now, let me just explain what I mean by listen. I don't just mean listen physically and hear their words. I mean listen mentally and emotionally and hear the message behind their words. I had an interesting conversation with a pastor who's seasoned. He's probably been in ministry over 30 years this week, and great dialogue. And we were talking about a whole different issue. And at the end of it, he weighed in. He said, before you told me that story, I had already decided where I would land, and it wasn't where you led me to. And a seasoned pastor of 30 years says, I now have a different perspective. He was a good listener. So if you watch Fox News, turn over to MSNBC. If you only watch Rachel Maddow, then see what Bill O'Reilly has to say on the subject. And if you only watch CNN, then flip over maybe to BBC to hear an international perspective. I guarantee you this, one who's been afforded the opportunity to travel, when you listen to news in another country, it's radically different than how it's portrayed here. Perspective. See, once you decide to become a learner and not a critic, you'll realize that some of the issues are far more complex than what they seem on the surface. Listen to me, and it doesn't mean that you're going to change your mind, but it does mean that you're going to be more like Jesus, who refuses political simplicity. When I thought about this week, I thought, how can I compare it? Some of us just sort of fall party line because that's what our mom and our dad were. They voted this way, so we vote that way. It's sort of like the affiliation a lot with choosing your favorite sports team. You're a fan of such and such a team because your dad was a fan of such and such a team. It doesn't mean they're the best team or the right team. You just chose that team. It's like Packer fans. I don't get it for the life of me. And we have two of them on staff. It's a whole other issue. I won't mention any names, but Aaron, dude, I just got to tell you, welcome to Denver. It's Bronco country. Come on, somebody, shout me out here. All right, I hoped you were still engaged. Didn't want to lose you in the midst of politics. So, number one, Jesus refuses political simplicity. Number two, Jesus refuses political complacency. Look at what Jesus says in their exchange. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "What portrait is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. I know I already read this, but I want to go back to it. Then he said to them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. He tells them to bring him a coin. It's a denarius. A denarius was a silver coin that bore the image and the name of Tiberius Caesar. That's already been established. And they bring it to Jesus, and Jesus asked them, "Whose image is on this coin?" And they answer, "Well, Caesar's." So Jesus says, "Give to Caesar the things that bear his image." This coin belongs to Caesar because it bears Caesar's image. And so give it to him. There are a number of things that are going on in Jesus' answer. One of them is that Jesus refuses political complacency. He doesn't try to escape what's going on. This is a big deal for us. In the midst of the political craziness of this season that we are in right now, we may feel tempted to sit this one out and completely withdraw altogether. In fact, that's, in my conversations with people, I found more that are falling into that category than any other. In fact, one person I talked to this week said, "That's really where I'm at." They said, "Come November 8th, I'm confident I'll go in and pull the lever, but right now, I'm just struggling." Maybe you're living in that tension as well. And some of us just want to disengage. We want to exonerate ourselves by saying, "I'm not participating in this year's election." But Jesus refuses that kind of political complacency. So that's part of what's going on when Jesus responds to our question. He could have just rolled his eyes, shook his head, and says, "I'm not with you Pharisees, and I'm certainly not with you Herodians. You're all idiots, and I'm going to sit this one out." But he doesn't go there. But that sounds like an easy option. Jesus weighs in with real wisdom and says to both sides, "Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God that which is God's." as his followers, can I just go on record as saying, I don't believe we have the luxury of sitting this one out. Why? We must embrace our dual citizenship. We have a dual citizenship. By God's grace, we have been afforded what I believe is an amazing privilege, and if you've traveled much of the world, you would agree with me, to be a citizen of the United States of America. Great privilege. But if you're a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ, the Bible says you are also a citizen of heaven. Dual citizenship. Now, I'm going to break it down from here. 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17, the Message paraphrase, and I like the way it reads. Make the master proud of you by being good citizens. Reject the authority, or respect. How many of you think, yeah, put the word reject in there. I like that one better. That's the Revised Substandard Perversion. Let's get back to the Message paraphrase. Respect the authorities, whatever their level. They are God's emissaries for keeping order. It is God's will that by doing good, you might cure the ignorance of the fools who think you're a danger to society. Exercise your freedom by serving God, not by breaking the rules. Treat everyone you meet with dignity. Love your spiritual family, that's the church. Revere God and respect the government. So you're saying, well, Keith, I'm still wrestling. Why should I be involved in the political process? First, it's part of our responsibility as citizens of this great nation. I don't need to reinforce that. You've heard me. By doing so, it gives us a voice and an opportunity to be a part of the process. I could say more, but for the sake of time, let's wrap it up. The third thing is this. Jesus refuses political simplicity. He refuses political complacency. And finally, he refuses political primacy. Primacy. What do I mean by that? Jesus said what? Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. But he goes on to say, and give to God that which is God's. What did he mean? Give to Caesar the things that bear his image, and give to God the things that bear his image. What bears God's image? We do. I do. You do. We do. Every person on this planet that's been created and brought into this world, even like Declan, who we dedicated today, but that goes for every one of us. You were created in the image of God. And what he's saying is, give yourself to God. Every one of us. This is huge. Listen to me. Before you're a Democrat, before you're a Republican, before you're a libertarian, there are probably two of you here. That was meant to be funny, but apparently it wasn't, so let's keep moving. Or whatever else you claim to be. You are first and foremost an image bearer of God. Therefore, our first allegiance, listen to me, friends, is to Him. Give to God that which is God's. Give yourself to Him. So you're saying, well, Keith, that's sort of weird. I get the coin, the Caesar, give to Caesar that which bears His image. How do I give myself to God? How do we do that? Well, Jesus went on to say in this same chapter in Matthew 22 some pretty important things. In fact, some people came up to him and said, you know, there's a lot of rules and laws and all kinds of talk out there. What's really the most important thing as we journey through this life and try and figure it out? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Here's what Jesus is saying. Back then and to each of us today. Whatever you do, are you ready for this? Lead with love. Lead with love. If Jesus was a United States citizen, I believe on November 8th, here's what he would do. He would make a choice in that voting booth based on love. Loving God and loving others. So let's try and wrap this up with just two thoughts. I already referenced it, but I want you to write it down because this is huge. Lead with love, not with fear. Lead with love, not with fear. Because the Bible says in 1 John that perfect love dispels all fear. Fear is not a good motivator. In other words, let me say it this way. We must refuse to be led, moved, or controlled by fear. Why? 2 Timothy 1:7. Because God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. That's what we should be led by as those who claim to be followers of Christ. Can I get a witness in the house? All right. I'm glad that like 17 of you agree with me. But maybe you'll appreciate and agree more, well, not more, but align yourself with some thinking from a great, I think, communicator and leader, Andy Stanley. Let me share with you a quote when he sort of touched on this subject. He said, government matters, policies matter, but none of it matters as much as men and women who understand faith. Faith that God keeps His promises and nothing can thwart His plans. We know this because of the most powerful person in Judea looked at Jesus and said, crucify Him, game over, it's done, let's move on. The only reason we know who Pilate is because we know the story of Jesus. Pilate, the governor, becomes a footnote in the story of Jesus. We have nothing to fear. God is in control. Get involved in the political process, but don't fix your eyes there. Fix your eyes on Jesus. End of quote. Great truth. The second simple thought I have as we wrap it up today is this. And this is going to be a stretch, but let me break it down after I state it. Love God's kingdom more than your country. Oh, I know I stepped on some landmines there. This is not an anti-patriotic statement. We should be patriotic. I need to be honest with you. For me, this is a big deal. I have been afforded what I consider the privilege of being in a number of different countries around the world. Europe, where things look good, and parts of Europe where they don't, and places like Russia and India and countries on the continent of Africa, South and Central America. I've been in a lot of places, only by the grace of God, but I want to tell you this. I always love coming home. I love our country. Don't miss what I'm trying to say here. But even though I love my country, this is not an anti-patriotic statement. This is a loyalty statement for anyone that claims to be a follower of Christ. Matthew 6:33, Jesus made it clear. Seek first, what? His kingdom. Let's all say that together. Let's read that verse together out loud. And when you read out loud, you actually have to open your mouth so that words come out. So let's try it. Are you ready? Read it with me. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So he says, seek first His kingdom. His kingdom above a political party, a platform, even an allegiance to a company or a country or an empire. Those words will stand the test of time. In Philippians 3:20, Paul reminds us that we are citizens of heaven. And in Philippians 1:27, he says, above all, everybody say above all, you must live as citizens of heaven. What's he saying? You have a dual citizenship. Yes, most of you in this room are citizens of the United States of America, a great privilege. You have that citizenship, but while you're here on this planet, in this great country, live as a citizen of heaven. In other words, the way God's people conduct themselves should look radically different than the ways that people that don't know God conduct themselves. There should be something that marks our behavior, our interactions, our conversations. It should be different. And so when you go into that voting booth on November 8th, you'll go in knowing that you hold a dual citizenship and that your primary allegiance is to Jesus Christ if you're a follower of Him and His kingdom. As such, listen to me, you're not placing your faith in a particular candidate, party, or platform, but first and foremost in the person of Jesus Christ, wanting His kingdom to come and His will to be done here on earth in the United States, just like it is in heaven. That's what we want at the end of the day. I guarantee you this. Those who are engaged in so much of the political fray, and some of it to me is just, I don't know, it's like nonsense, because come November 9th, I guarantee you some of those same people are going to say, you know what, we've lost our focus, we've lost our way, we better get back to preaching the gospel. And I'm like, why did you stop preaching the gospel? It is the only hope of the world. And so Listen, friends, we're not the first to deal with this tension. During the years of Jesus' time on earth, the disciples continually wondered about this issue and all the tension that was going on. When would his kingdom come? When would he's going to overthrow the Roman Empire? What would their role be? In the traditional view, the Messiah would be an earthly conqueror who would free Israel from Rome. But the kingdom Jesus spoke about was first of all a spiritual kingdom established in the hearts and the lives of his followers that was then manifest in their homes and their families, their places of business and commerce, in their schools and their communities, in their countries. And so we pick it up in Acts 1, 6 through 8. So when they met together, they asked him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel? That's a political question. He said to them, it's not for you to know the times and the dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, so that as my followers, you can be my witnesses wherever you are in the world. It starts in Jerusalem, then all of Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. That's what Jesus wants us to stay focused on, friends. It's not about this platform or that platform. It's about this gospel that is good news to any person in any part of the world, that will help anybody, whatever they're dealing with. That's why he apprehended us. That's why he rescues us. That's why he brings us out of darkness into light. That's why he extends this beautiful thing called grace to us that brings us into relationship with himself that we couldn't have afforded if we had to pay for it ourselves. There's no way we could have earned it. It's a gift from beginning and start to finish, and all we know is we've received grace. Freely we've received. Now let's freely give that same message of grace to the world. And so that's what it's about. Like other Jews, the disciples chafed under the Roman rulers. They wanted Jesus to free Israel from Roman power and then become their king. And Jesus replied that the God the Father sets the timetable for all events, worldwide, national, and personal. Our primary allegiance is to be with Jesus and seeing his kingdom established in people's lives. And I guarantee you this, how many of you know when Jesus' kingdom is established in Romans 14:17, it's one of righteousness, peace, and joy. How many of you know wherever you have people that are right with God and have peace and joy, it's going to be a better environment to live in? That's his kingdom, and it comes to us. And it's not here nor there, the Bible says, but it's within us. No matter who is elected as the next president of this great country, we rest in knowing that Jesus is still king. Independent of who occupies the White House, I believe what God ultimately wants is to live in this house and to live in your house. I mean you and you and you and you, every person. That's ultimately what he wants. He wants to occupy us. He wants to take up residence in our lives. He wants to establish his love, his life, his grace, his mercy, his truth, his kingdom in us. Then we bring it to every conversation we engage in. We bring it to every place that we engage in commerce and work and business and exchange and test in schools, wherever we find ourselves. And so, in just a few months, our country is going to elect a new president of the most powerful elected position on the planet. Some things will change, guaranteed. Some things are going to change. But the most important things will not change. No matter what happens this coming November, can I say it one more time? Jesus Christ is still king. That will not change, friends. And we are still his image bearers. That will not change. We are still called to seek first his kingdom and see it established in the earth. That should never change. That's what we're all about. So, what am I saying? Be like Jesus. Refuse political simplicity. Refuse political complacency. And third and finally, refuse political primacy. Let's worship Jesus as King. I want to invite you to pray with me right now as we wrap it up today. And we're going to have just a short time of worship here for us to respond and maybe even process a little bit of what we've talked about. Father, we thank you for your presence here. And because you're here today, it's a game changer. God, we thank you today for this amazing thing called grace that invades our lives, that we couldn't have earned, we couldn't have bought, we couldn't have paid off, we couldn't have in any way established a relationship with you on our own. In fact, that's the good news that Jesus came to bring. that independent of our own past performance or behavior, you've come to give us new life, a fresh start, a new beginning. My sense is that there are people in this room right now that's the cry of their heart, and they maybe didn't even realize it. And so I thank you for this opportunity right now for every one of us in this room to receive grace, to receive forgiveness, to receive new life, and then to become, as your image bearer, one who reveals that wherever we are. Was just everyone here pray with me, your own words, but sort of let me lead you in a prayer. Just say, God, thank you for bringing me here today. The last thing I thought I was going to hear about was politics. But Lord, it was really more about you. And God, I thank you for this marvelous thing called grace, even though I don't fully understand it. And I thank you for your love for me that is not subject to my performance, but you love me, period. And right now, I just acknowledge that, and I receive your love. I receive your grace. I receive your forgiveness. Thank you that today is a new day. It's the first day of the rest of my life. In order for it to be the best and everything you want it to be, the best I know how, I surrender myself to you. And I just, in doing so, I receive everything that you have for me. And I ask you now to fill me with your Spirit. Let your kingdom come and your will be done in my life like it is in heaven. In Jesus' name.